Today I'm bringing you into the deep, dark depths of my messy, unfinished basement. And we are going to talk wood stoves. I got a list of questions from you guys about wood stoves, as well as I'm gonna show you how I light our wood stove. We have had many different types of wood stoves over my whole life. But right now we have a wood furnace. So there's an electric furnace with wood backup. So the electric furnace keeps things just at a base level, and the wood furnace is how we top up the heat when it's colder and we want it cozy. So it's quite big, it holds a lot. And we're gonna go over first how I light a wood stove, and then I'll answer questions. The first thing is dampers, and many wood stoves will have some sort of like pull or open or whatever. Learning your dampers is very specific to your wood stove. Because ours is a furnace, it's actually thermostat controlled from upstairs. So before we come down, we put the thermostat to as hot as it goes, and that is how you open the damper. So that's done, and now it's time to make some kindling. The most important part of kindling and firewood is that your wood is dry. Dry and seasoned. For us, we can cut down dead standing wood and it is dry and ready to burn. Sometimes it needs a bit, but usually it's ready to burn. If you live in a very damp climate, you might be needing to cut and let it season for months or even a year. Wet firewood is frustrating because you're gonna struggle to light a fire with wet kindling. Even if it looks dry, if it's not truly seasoned, it's still green, you're gonna struggle. You're going to struggle to damper down your wood stove, because it's just gonna die out. You're gonna have to have the damper so open just to keep it roaring, because it's gonna need that oxygen. And lastly, the most crucial thing is that wet, green, unseasoned wood builds up creosote in your furnace, and that is how you get chimney fires. If you are dealing with unseasoned wood because it's the only option you have, and we have been there, every time I light the fire, I would let that fire roar for an hour or two. This burns out any creosote that is built up over the last day while the fire was down and simmering, and helps keep things safe. If you are always just simmering low, dampered down your furnace, your wood stove, it's just a good way to build up creosote. Even with our good aged wood, I make sure that fire roars for an hour before it gets dampered down. It's just a good habit to get in, and when we've got our chimney cleaned and looked at, they're like, you have no buildup, you're totally fine. So I know that my strategies are working. When it comes to kindling, we often have scraps of wood like this, especially when Marius worked in construction. He would bring home offcuts, and these were easy firewood. This one is hard to chop, so I'm not actually gonna do it. Sorry, easy kindling. It's easier when they're like 2x4s. Here is birch, and this birch would be kind of hard to cut into kindling. Birch is quite heavy. However, birch bark peels off, which is hard to do one-handed. So even if you're going to use this just as a block of firewood, peel off the birch bark, because this lights really well. It actually burns kind of black because of the sap in it. And birch bark is excellent fire starter. So if you remember, rip that off before you throw this block in the wood stove, and you have some easy fire starting help. I won't show you using that today because it's a regional thing, but if you have birch, make sure to peel off some of it, and that wooden box there. I don't know why these things ended up here. You never know in our house, but this is what we throw kindling in if we have extra kindling. So here is the block that I chose for firewood. It's dry. It has almost no knots. It only has this one knot in it. Knots make it hard to start. So you can see in the top, there's not a lot there. And it looks fairly good. It's kind of dirty, but that's fine. And so this is what we are going to chop into kindling. So you can use a hatchet. I do this inside my basement because our basement is unfinished and concrete floor and all that. And I'm totally fine with chopping wood in here. You can use a hatchet, or we have this kind of mid-sized axe that we use. It's considered a splitting axe. I don't have any other one in here to show you right now. Basically, make sure it's sharp because that's going to make a big difference. And I don't do a lot of wood splitting right now when I'm pregnant because it's hard on my stomach and my hips. So I'm not going to be showing you wood splitting today, but we are going to split kindling. So the grain of the wood goes this way, right? Because the tree goes around this way, like the tree rings. So I'm splitting like this. So I'm going to aim to either just to split off like a couple inch chunk. I'm not splitting kindling from this block. I'm going to split this block smaller and then split kindling from it. So here's hoping this block works and that I don't look like a dingbat. So I can't get a good swing in here because I can't go all the way up to the ceiling, but I should still be able to do this just fine. So it didn't split on the first go, which is very common for me. So I often it's going to be stubborn on me. There we go, that's a better one. I'm very out of practice with splitting wood right now because I'm actually not the primary wood splitter in our house because we have boys who do it. And girls once they're older, but they're just not old enough. First one I split decided to come off. Okay. So I've got a couple chunks now. These are not quite big enough. This is probably not enough to light my fire with. I'm going to show you anyways. So I have these. And then from here, I hold it on here and can easily split it. So I like to just hold it on here so I'm not like trying to wildly aim and hit my fingers. So here I've ended up getting some chips off, so this side's quite skinny, so now I'm just gonna go to the fat end because it's not wanting to split into nice pieces for me. Why would it split into nice pieces while I was videoing, right? That would make too much sense. Now, if you were super concerned about your axe, or you were super concerned about your floor, or you are not on a hard surface, you would want to be doing this on top of a splitting block, which is just a flat block of firewood. However, I'm good enough to not hit the floor, and I don't care about my floor. It's concrete floor. As long as you don't hit the axe with it, you're fine. So I've got my birch bark, which I'm not going to use today. And I've got kindling, which is not evenly or any whatever. It's just roughly cut up. This block did not want to cut up nicely. And then I've got some slightly bigger pieces. And these help me. These are the next step before a big block. One thing to look at is where your ashes are at. So mine are nice and low. There isn't much in here. If they start to build up when it's cold, you're gonna wanna scoop them out into a metal bucket and dispose of them however is mandated by your insurance. So for us, we use a metal bucket and we bring them immediately outside. They don't sit inside at all. And if it's snowy out, I actually spread the ashes on walkways and it helps work as like de-icer. If you live in a wood stove family, you're probably gonna have paper that would normally be in this bin here, as well as there's a stack of cardboard over there. This is messier than it normally is, but this is also just real life for you. So we're gonna take some cardboard and some paper. I am a scruncher. I do not rip. So all I do is I scrunch up paper into balls. Some people shred and use newspaper, but I find this creates better airspace, and that shredding it, it's harder to get good airspace. In this wood stove, I do this in the front of the wood stove. And then I take my cardboard that I kind of tore up a bit, and I want to tent it. I still need to be able to access the paper in the front to light it. So I just have a couple pieces and I just kind of drape them over. Now, my strategy with the wood is more of a log house, not a teepee. So, I do is I put 2 pieces over top. And then my next pieces go sideways. So with the teepee, I find it likes to just collapse and not work out well. With this log house style, I can stack. I think my husband's knocking on. I had to go open the door quick. So I can stack it, and this way it doesn't collapse on itself. It just gently settles down as the paper burns and still has lots of airspace, because with fire you have ignition, fuel, and oxygen. I don't even actually need all this kindling. I'm just gonna chuck some in the bin for another day. So now, if you can't reach in there nicely, you can use like one of your tiny pieces of wood and light the end of it and use it as a lighter. But I think I can reach down in there just fine. Okay, my camera battery started dying right as I was doing that, so I'm quickly on my phone here videoing. So it's gonna start to take off. With some wood stoves, you are going to want to close the door some. Back up a second here. To create a better draw. So you'll close them like this, and that creates a really nice suction draw, especially if you find that your wood stove is smoking out. This will help you with the draw. This one doesn't need that, so I don't. When I talk about creosote buildup, you can see a bit right here where it's shiny, but there isn't much really else in there. Last time this was used, it was simmered down and just dampered down until it died. So this is why it's important for me to make it roar. So it is starting to smoke out a bit. So we're just gonna close it up like this, creates a good draw, and then you're not smoking out. As for lighting, we use lighters with child locks because we have children. Matches do not work in our house for safety. I left this for a minute here, and as you can see, pretty much all of the wood is on fire. Some coals are starting to form. You could leave it a little bit longer, but this is usually the point when I add my next blocks of wood. I made 5 small blocks and I'm just gonna use 2. So the purpose with these, I'm gonna put them on top. This one, just again, there's still good oxygen space. It has more surface area on the fuel for ignition. This kindling is not roaring on me here. But adding those 2 smaller blocks also allows me to put on a bigger block without crushing that kindling. So because this kindling is not roaring on me here, I need something as a fan. You can blow on it or just use something as a fan, because we have ignition, we have fuel, so what it's lacking is oxygen. See? Much happier. This also works in terms of if you put a big block in and that block is just really not burning very well, if you prop it up with a small piece like this, prop one end up so that the block can get more oxygen, because you have the ignition, you have the fuel, you need oxygen. That helps the oxygen flow and will help save your fire. At this point, I could close this and walk away. I actually want this to be a little sideways. There we go. I can throw another block on here. I have space to throw another block on, and I can close this and walk away for, I know I can walk away for an hour or 2, at which point I would load it up and damper it down. I'm pretty fast at getting the fire going and walking away because I got other things to do in my day other than just sit and worry about babying a fire. So for me, it's about getting it lit as fast as possible. So we're gonna close this up now and I'm gonna answer your questions. So first and foremost, what I need to suggest is that you need to know what your local insurance laws and all those sort of things and what your insurance requires for your wood stove, and that's really important because there is rules about where your wood pile can be and how you dispose of ashes and all sorts of things. So when you buy a house that has a wood stove here in British Columbia, Canada, when you're filling out your insurance forms, you have to do what's called a Woodstove questionnaire. And it feels overwhelming at first, but you can either, when you get a wood stove inspection, which is often required, ask the person who's doing the inspection to help you with the wood stove questionnaire, which I've done before, or you can just call your insurance agent and be like, hey, I have a question about this or that, and just don't be afraid to ask questions. The wood stove questionnaire wants you to answer things like, how far apart is your wood stove to the wall? How far is your wood stove to the nearest combustibles? All those sort of things about your chimney and such. When we bought our first house, we had a wood stove called a Pacific Energy, and we really liked it. It was a really old but still approved wood stove. Marius had to upgrade the chimney. The brick chimney was not to code. He had to add an approved liner and a chimney cap, and we also it was just like laminate flooring in front of the wood stove, and that was not approved. So he got was it a hardy board, Mare? It's called a hardy board. It's a concrete composite board, and put it flush up against, the wood stove was kind of like up on a little ledge. So put it flush up against there. So we got the wood stove inspector to come. This is what they said. We did those things. They came back, they inspected it, they approved it. we could then submit our insurance papers and begin using our wood stove. So we have had really tiny wood stoves. We have had big wood stoves. We now have a wood furnace, as I showed you below, and our wood furnace has the ducting like a electric furnace has. So while it's not our favorite for ambiance, I would love to have a wood stove in our living room. For heating a 3,500 square foot house, a furnace is our best option. The kids aren't home right now and this cat is lonely, so I have to hang out with it. I have my questions on my computer. So, brands of wood stoves. We have never bought a wood stove. We've always just had what we've had that came with the house. I can't even remember what brand our wood furnace is, but wood stoves that people like. I've heard a lot of good things about Blaze Kings and about Yodels. The only experience we had with a Yodel, which is spelled Jotul, was a really, really tiny one, and we only had wet firewood. It was in a rental and they provided the wood and we didn't love it. But I could see how if you had a bigger one and good wood that you would really like it. But the Blaze King is really popular here, especially for people who rely on wood stoves for their primary heating, as it, you don't need to bite me. You can load it up and you basically like never have to light a fire. They just keep loading it, loading it, loading it. But as I was talking about earlier, that's when you have to be really careful that you have really good wood and that you are periodically opening the dampers and letting it burn hotter to burn out creosote buildup, so that you don't end up with a chimney fire. Safety concerns. So kids nearby wood stoves. We have never had a problem with babies and toddlers and wood stoves. Where we find we start to have problems is when they're like 3 years old and they start to get brave with it, or they're horsing around near it, and that's when we've had, I think every kid is minor burned themselves once. Only in one house did we have an actual wood stove surround. Our first house we bought, it was raised up, so they naturally didn't end up as close to it. And this one is a wood furnace. So it depends on your comfort level. If you want to have a wood stove surround of some point, like a baby gate, you're a very noisy kitty. You just want to be acknowledged. Or you want to just teach them. It's up to you. Fires at night. If your wood stove is all approved, you've gone through all the insurance steps, etc., etc., it's in a sealed wood stove, not an open fireplace, perfectly safe option. What do you do if there's a poor draw and you keep getting smoke in your house? There is math and formulas to size of wood stove and chimneys and such, and it drawing properly. And if your wood stove is not drawing well, then you might want to get a wood stove specialist out. I don't know whether an inspector would be your best bet. I'm not quite sure, but this is something that is a mechanical problem between your wood stove and your chimney, and not necessarily something that's a quick fix. The house smoking could be that you're needing to play with your dampers some more. You know how when I was lighting it and I closed the door a bit, that helps the draw so that we don't end up with smoke in the house. And then there's that happy medium between your fire dying and your fire roaring. Again, as I explained earlier, a lot of that is in having good wood. If you have green, unseasoned wood, you're going to struggle with your fire all day, every day, and constantly be trying to revive it. Marius, do you want to come get this kitten? Because it's really obnoxious while I'm trying to video. Put it on the floor? Yeah, it's going to come right back up here. This is also learning your dampers and trial and error with your dampers. But if you have green unseasoned wood, you're just going to constantly be fighting with it. Humidity and fans. So wood heat is dry, which is awesome because then you can hang up your snow clothes and dry them out, and you can dry your shoes by the fire and all this sort of thing. And it's awesome, but it also can lead to dry air, which makes you wake up with a dry mouth and coughing and that sort of thing. So for us, because we don't have a wood stove that we can put a pot on top of, I will sometimes, when we're home, just have, in really dry, cold weather, a pot on the stove, and maybe I'll put some spices in it, or some pine needle or spruce needles, or some orange peels, just something to scent the air. If you have a wood stove you can put a pot on top of, and you're home and around it and able to pay attention so you don't boil it dry, you can have a pot on top of your wood stove, and that helps with humidity in the air. There's these really nifty wood stove fans that just... Mara, could you please come get this cat? So these fans run by the heat of your stove. So when your stove is cold, they don't run, and when your stove is hot, it runs. And these are excellent. If you have a big house, I'd even suggest having two that point in different directions. They work so good. When we had one in our house, on our first house that we bought, it made the difference between it taking a couple hours for the house to warm up and the house being warm in half an hour. It was totally worth the investment. They're probably $100 to $200, and they are absolutely worth it. Can you install your wood stove yourself? This is going to depend on where you live. Even if you install it yourself, you're probably still going to have to get it inspected for insurance purposes by here it's called a wet certified. I don't know what wet stands for. Here, let's look up. Wood Energy Technology Transfer Inspector. So even if you install it yourself, if you are allowed to install it yourself, and I would ask your insurance company, or I would call the wood stove inspector and ask them if you're allowed to install it. Are you allowed to fix the chimney on your own? All these sort of things, because you don't want to compromise your house insurance. Because, at least where we live, if you compromise your house insurance, you compromise your mortgage. And those are two things that we just don't want to compromise. No, sir. If you go out of town, how do you keep your house from freezing? We don't go away in winter because of animals, or just one of us goes away, because we have too many other things going on. If wood was your only source of heat, you would need to shut off your water and drain the lines, and I don't know how you do that, but there is a way that you can do that where you have to drain your lines. Or ideally you have some baseboards or something that you can run at just like 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, just to keep your house from freezing. Because realistically, if it's like freezing really hard and like that hard, you're gonna start freezing like you're canning and that sort of stuff. So don't wanna do that. I don't know how cold for how long that would have to be. But ideally you have some electric heat, or you have a house sitter, all that sort of thing. There's also insurance laws about if you are away for a certain amount of days and something happens with your water and there's water damage, and because you haven't shut off your water while you were gone, the insurance is not liable. So check into that too. If you're going away, you might have to shut off your water. How do you know if a wood stove is right for your home? Is it cold where you live? Then I'd say a wood stove is right for your home. There is nothing like the cozy warmth of a wood stove. I would want to look at, are you able to get your own firewood yourself? Or do you have to buy firewood? And what does it cost to buy firewood? And do you have a place to store firewood? Do you have to buy a whole winter's firewood at once? Or can you buy it one cord at a time? Do you have a place in your house that makes sense for installing a chimney? Because it has to, like, yeah. There's a lot of factors, but I love wood stoves. Love them. Marius is our primary firewood cutter, meaning the only person who does. I don't cut firewood. And so I asked if he could answer this question about different types of firewood because I'm not very good at explaining it. So a lot of firewood is going to depend on where you live for what type of trees are available. So on Salt Spring, where we used to live, we could get fir, arbutus, and cedar.
Mm-hmm.
And what did we burn?
All of the above.
Okay, but like what was the, like why, if we only burn cedar logs, cedar burns really fast, but it's really good kindling.
Mm-hmm.
But it's gonna burn up real fast and it's not gonna keep your house warm all night.
No.
Fir.
It's a lot more dense and burns slower.
Yeah. But fir also is often a lot greener and harder to...
Just have to season.
Yeah, you have to season it. How long did you have to season wood on Salt Spring?
A year was usually enough.
So, if you are buying firewood from someone, you want to confirm that it's seasoned wood and you're not buying a load of green wood. And it's worth the price difference. Unless you have the space and time to season it. Which is just letting it sit under cover, even under a tarp. Just letting it sit dead and dry.
Split it and let it dry out.
So arbutus burn, which is also called madrona, burn like coal.
Be like birch up here.
But it was hard to split.
If you split it green, it's split
Yes,
really
you have to
easy.
split it right
If
away.
it's dry, it's hard to split.
Yeah. Once it's dry and down, it's like trying to split concrete. And then up here, what trees do we burn up here?
Pine, spruce, birch, poplar if you have nothing else to burn.
So out of pine and spruce and birch, what is your preference?
I like all of them. Whichever one's dry and I can cut down.
Which burns the hottest?
Oh, probably birch.
But birch needs longer seasoning, does it?
I don't know.
Green birch takes a lot longer, I think.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm not the birch expert. If it's dead, it burns really good.
So on Salt Spring, dead standing wood was still damp. It wasn't really a thing so much. Whereas,
No, it's dry.
but people there wasn't really much dead standing wood to cut.
No, you can't just go cut wood there.
Yeah, whereas here there's lots of crown land that you can get an inexpensive permit and cut there, or you can get permission from farmers, and there's permissions from friends who are farmers and have lots of land here. It cut me off and I thought that I had got more than I had, so now you're just gonna get me on a different day in a different outfit. Finishing this off. So dead standing wood is dry and standing. And especially if we cut this in winter when things are frozen and fairly dry. I have wet erase marker on my fingers from fixing something on the fridge. When we fall the trees, they fall on snow. So the wood stays clean. It doesn't get really dirty because dirty wood is really hard on your saw when there's dirt and sand, etc. on your saw. And so yeah, it's cleaner in winter. It's easier to split wood below -10 Celsius, which is about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. It just splits way better. It is nicer to get when there isn't piles of snow because sometimes it makes it harder when there's piles of snow. But anyways, in the summer, basically where we used to live in a wet climate, basically Pacific Northwest type climate, Salt Spring Island, British Columbia, we needed to get all our firewood in the dry summer. Here, we do some firewood in the summer, but primarily people do firewood once it's below freezing, and in winter people do a lot of firewood, and Marius's dad does firewood all winter as part of his income. So with a change in how things are in our house this year, with Marius no longer working a full-time job and venison for dinner being our full-time thing, Marius has flirted with helping his dad do firewood a bit. Oh, it just started snowing, I think. Is that like snow globe type snow? Hey Freya, I think Rowan's in the washroom. Could you go check for me, please?
Okay.
So he might do some firewood with his dad. Once we're good for firewood, we'll see where he's at. There's only so many physical jobs that he can do here around the farm in winter, besides just keeping animals fed, and he needs to have more physical activity than that. So he will snowshoe and he will hunt and he will fish. Right now, him and the boys are ice fishing. Freya didn't want to go.
Guys, Rowan gets sick. She's sticking her
Oh, and Rose stuck her hands in the toilet. Anyways, I think I finished that off enough and I gotta wash the baby. Have a good day.